Ever wonder what happens when a beloved beat-em-up franchise tries to reinvent itself and flops spectacularly? Well, that's essentially Double Dragon 5 in a nutshell. Double Dragon 5 A Shadow Falls is the game that took the beloved beat-em-up franchise in a surprising, and for many fans disappointing, new direction. Released in 1994, Double Dragon 5 wasn't the co-op brawler fans had come to know and love, but rather a one-on-one fighting game that attempted to capture the competitive arcade magic of games like Street Fighter 2. As of today, Double Dragon 5 is often remembered as one of the most controversial chapters in the series. So join me as we unpack what went wrong, explore its curious development, and see why this game stands out as one of the weirdest games in the Double Dragon legacy. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the epic failure that was Double Dragon 5. Yeah. Arcade-style beat-em-ups, you've got to love this fine genre. While a period existed in the mid-90s where certain brands were trying to pivot away from this style of play, fortunately brilliant brawlers are back, and we have found ourselves living through a beat-em-up renaissance period. Score massive discounts on incredible beat-em-ups like Double Dragon Gaiden, Streets of Rage 4, River City Girls 2, and the amazing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, all through my affiliate links below. Save up to 90% off of thousands of modern, AAA, retro and indie titles just by using the links in my pinned comments. Snag amazing deals and support my content at the same time. Happy shopping! The Double Dragon series, a franchise that has certainly had manic highs and lows. Yoshihisa Kishimoto's original 1987 game established the two-player beat-em-up genre, captivating arcade gamers everywhere. Despite its innovations, though, the game suffered from a lot of slowdown, but this problem was soon ironed out with the release of Double Dragon 2 the following year. The refinement of this game would inspire a whole generation of imitators, with Final Fight, Golden Axe and Turtles arcade games all hitting the market by 1989. By 1990, the arcade would receive Double Dragon 3, a game that many people label as the first misstep in the series. The game, which carries the subheading The Rosetta Stone, was lambasted for being very different from what came before it. The game was not developed by Kishimoto in-house at Technos, but instead outsourced to East Technology, resulting in a game that looked completely graphically different from the others. And more annoyingly, it featured a greedy pay-to-win mechanic, where players could make their fighters stronger by using real-world money within a game shop. Fortunately, at the time, the wise public rejected this preposterous idea, as very few people were dumb enough to want to pay to win at a game. In conjunction with all of these arcade games, there were various home ports across multiple formats, with the NES receiving more unique bespoke offerings rather than straight conversions due to the system's high sales numbers. In fact, as covered before on here, Double Dragon 3 would be a completely different game altogether on that hardware, even receiving its own subheading, The Sacred Stones. Despite being arguably better than the arcade game, it still had its problems, leading to the game becoming a commercial failure. Due to this, Bimmy and Jimmy live on in infamy to this day. The fourth chapter in the Double Dragon series would see changes after the failings of the previous games. The next entry, titled Super Double Dragon, was a console-exclusive title, which made logical sense in late 1990, considering the arcade industry was dwindling. This 16-bit title for the Super Nintendo showed promising development, especially under the leadership of Maneki Ebenuba, a man who joined Technos due to his love for Double Dragon. From a vast amount of comments on my Super Double Dragon video, it's evident the game still has a fan base, with some even proclaiming it as their favourite Double Dragon game of all time. The game is appealing due to its graphical fidelity when compared to the early Double Dragon games, and it builds on the gameplay with an impressive grabbing and blocking system. While the game has its strengths, it still wasn't as good as it could have been, due to strict development time constraints, leading to the game being released unfinished. Unfortunately for Technos, it sold terribly, releasing on the Super Nintendo in a similar time frame to Street Fighter 2. Like Double Dragon years before, Street Fighter 2 also became a genre-defining game, captivating consumers with a new way to present fighting, causing many to forget about Double Dragon altogether. Ironically, Street Fighter 2 would also rejuvenate the arcade industry, the very field Double Dragon had just left behind. 3 years later, in 1994, this finally brings us to 1994 and the release of Double Dragon 5. Even at the time, the game's title was confusing, as there was no Double Dragon 4. But I guess with Super Double Dragon existing, Double Dragon 5 kind of made sense, as it would be the 5th Double Dragon game to appear on Nintendo hardware. This was the logic gamers were forced to accept for years, until of course 2017, when Arc System Works complicated the chronology further by releasing a retro game styled after the NES classics, titled, you guessed it, Double Dragon 4, resulting in Double Dragon having one of the most chronologically irritating series in gaming history. So let's discuss how we got the fighting game mess that we would be faced with in 1994. As of 1993, Technos Japan had begun heavily licensing out their Double Dragon brand, such as Rare's Battletoads Double Dragon, distributed by Trade West, along with Double Dragon The Revenge of Billy Lee, published and distributed by Virgin Interactive. The same year also saw the birth of an animated TV series, a collaborative American, Canadian and Italian project produced by Dick Animation City, Bobot Entertainment and Italian studio Reti Italia SPA. The existence of this Dick show is important in today's tale, because in an insane move, Double Dragon 5 will be based on this very television show. The subheading for Double Dragon 5 and the first episode in this series even share the same name, The Shadow Falls. Like all the other Double Dragon projects mentioned, Technos had nothing to do with Double Dragon 5. Instead, the game would be an American title published by Trade West, but developed by Leyland Interactive Media. As you can see, this US developed game is dramatically different from every Double Dragon game before it. The side-scrolling beat-em-up formula that made the franchise famous is absent. In its place, we get a standard fighting game, and with the recent success the fighting game genre had found, you can probably guess why such a paradigm shift took place. The decision for such a change is pretty transparent. As discussed earlier, Street Fighter II took over the world in 1991, and other fighting franchises found success afterwards, including Mortal Kombat, an American-produced franchise. Moving Billy and Jimmy to a game of this format seemed logical, as games in this style were extremely profitable at the time. Double Dragon 5 was made available on popular consoles of the era, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Mega Drive and the Atari Jaguar. I guess saying popular is a bit of a stretch. Each version of Shadow Falls featured a different number of playable characters, with up to 12 fighters available in some versions. We'll discuss these characters in more detail shortly, but first let's touch on the gameplay itself. Like many fighters, Shadow Falls takes advantage of the Super Nintendo 6-button layout, allowing for weak, medium and strong punches and kicks to be mapped to individual buttons, with the same setup on the Jaguar version. Mega Drive version with its 3-button controller maps weak, medium and strong attacks to each button, and the start button toggles between punches and kicks. Pairing these attacks with directional pads allows for other moves as well. To further capture the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat market, Shadow Falls includes a fatality system called Overkills, where losing characters display unique death animations when defeated by certain attacks. As we discuss the roster, we'll highlight some unique moves each character can perform, but regardless of moves, it's worth noting that Double Dragon 5 doesn't feature great physics, making the gameplay feel clunky and vastly inferior to the game it tried to imitate. The roster, of course, includes Billy and Jimmy Lee, the series stars. They function as this game's equivalent of Street Fighter's Ryu and Ken. They can perform spinning attacks, leaping uppercuts, and even shoot fireballs, so nothing new or innovative here. It's pretty copy and paste. While you will likely be familiar with this dynamic duo, you won't necessarily be with the rest of the cast, as most of the Shadow Warriors were pulled directly from the animated TV show. The basic plot of the show revolves around the brothers who were separated at birth. Billy was raised by an elderly martial artist called the Oldest Dragon, while Jimmy was raised by the evil Shadow Master as his second in command. The Lee brothers initially oppose each other, but when Jimmy is betrayed by the Shadow Master, he joins his brother as a Dragon Warrior. The rest of the show features the brothers gaining new allies in their fight against the Shadow Master and his henchmen, resulting in many shenanigans. The TV show storyline loosely adapts from the NES version of the first Double Dragon game, where technical limitations allow players to control only one Lee brother, positioning the other as evil. Holding such a thought is amusing that a technical limitation became the plot for a TV show, which then inspired a video game, a proper full circle moment. Among the Shadow Warriors, the leader in the TV show, the Shadow Master, is the game's final boss. His goal is to cover the world in darkness and shadow.
I'm the Shadow Man, I'm going to plunge the world into darkness.
There he is, kids! The Shadow Man!
He has powers like shapeshifting, teleportation and uses electrical and flame-based projectiles, but of course we have more. Ridiculously, another boss character, Dominique, isn't from the TV show at all. According to the game's manual, she's a dangerous dominatrix with a whip and knives on her high heels, acting as the Shadow Master's personal bodyguard. I guess the show wasn't diverse enough to have decent characters to make up a fighting game roster. With regards to the TV show continuity though, we have Jawbreaker, the #1 master of Chujitsu, notable for having 3 different projectile attacks, which is as excessive as his appetite. Then there's Ice Pick, a cyborg whose body is made entirely of solid crystal, wielding a sword and dagger with ice powers, making him a Mortal Kombat Sub-Zero clone. We have Sickle, who specialises in disguises and wields 2 large red sickles, Trigger Happy, a large purple-skinned warrior who uses a mounted energy blaster, and Countdown, a cyborg with rocket attacks and laser vision. In the show, he was punished for treason and now fights for survival. Like Dominique, the rest of the roster is unique to the game. We have Bones, an undead skeleton with a laser rifle, Blade, a high-paid mercenary who wields knives, and Sika, a shameless clone of Mortal Kombat's female fighters like Melina and Katana, with a Street Fighter-inspired moveset. On the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive, players can access 10 fighters initially and unlock 2 boss fighters via codes. The Atari Jaguar version, though more powerful than the others, is ironically less polished, missing 3 characters and putting Dominique in the main roster. These differences arose because Telegames, rather than Leyland Interactive, ported the Jaguar version. Double Dragon 5 also has multiple modes. Tournament mode acts as an arcade mode, Versus Battle allows 2-player fights, Dossier mode offers character profiles, Watch mode lets players watch 2 AI-controlled fighters fight it out, and Quest mode, the most unique, offers plot-based battles. In Quest mode, players can choose to play as Billy or Jimmy to stop the Shadow Master's plague, or as a Shadow Warrior aiming to replace the Master. Players can even customize characters' attributes and alter the storyline by making Billy the Shadow Boss while Jimmy is good. Upon release, Double Dragon 5 received mainly negative reviews. EGM stated, "If it wasn't for the title screen, I wouldn't have known it was a Double Dragon." Superplay found the CPU challenging but criticised the game as too shallow and lacking real fight. GamePro was kinda, calling it an unoriginal but competent Street Fighter 2 clone, so nothing overly positive. The Jaguar version faced harsher criticism, with EGM calling its graphics and audio outdated and noting terrible controls due to the Jaguar's number pad. GamePro further criticised the Jaguar version's headache-inducing music and average graphics on a 64-bit system. Reflecting on this game, it's a colourful, cartoony affair, faithful to the animated show. But who wanted a video game based on a bad show derived from a decent game series? What a ludicrous thing to bother to make. The decisions made to make Double Dragon 5 a success, likely mimicking Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, delivered an experience completely misaligned with the core Double Dragon series. Calling this game Double Dragon 5 is, in my opinion, a total disgrace. It's nothing like Double Dragon, nor was it made by the company who made the classics in the first place. In fact, it is not even from the same country as the rest of the series. This title is nothing more than an American cash grab riding on the fighting game boom produced by Street Fighter 2. It stands out little from other fighters and degraded the brand to an all-time low. Is Double Dragon 5 as Shadow Falls the worst fighting game ever? Probably not, but it's so disconnected from the franchise it claims to be a part of that it's a total disgrace. Imagine if after the Americans released a Super Mario show, Nintendo let a random company make a Mario game based on the show and then just called it Super Mario Bros. 5. Yet let it be an entirely different genre to the Mario games we all knew and loved. Well, that's exactly what happened to poor Double Dragon here. What an absolute joke. Don't forget you can get massive discounts on incredible modern beat-em-ups like Double Dragon Gaiden, Streets of Rage 4, River City Girls 2 and the amazing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, all through my affiliate links below. Save up to 90% on thousands of modern AAA, retro and indie titles just by using the links in my pinned comment. Snag amazing deals and support my content at the same time. Happy shopping and I'll see you all soon. Cheerio!